I was so excited when I got this car. I mean, who wouldn't be? It's really well made, but I still want to add some really important details. And of course, a T-Rex. So welcome back to my channel and let's have some fun. The model kit from Tamiya was pretty straightforward, and there were even a base and more parts for different poses. You could change the leg pose and also the jaw. I went for the standing leg position and the open jaw. Here I'm using cement glue in which I dissolved a few sprue pieces, also known as sprue glue, and my goal was to fill some of the gaps with this sprue glue. There was a bit of a sharp edge where the two main pieces connected, so I flattened that out with the hobby knife a bit. Then I added the legs, to which I had already glued the feet, and added the really short arms. And for the head you can choose between an open or a closed mouth, and I chose the open one because that just suited the scene much better. And with the head glued in place, the T-Rex was done. Well, at least assembled. I still had to do some finishing touches, but that's our T-Rex. As you can see here, there are quite some gaps, and I decided to fill them with white putty because I thought that was quick and easy. But in the end, maybe that wasn't the best choice. I should have chosen a different putty from the start, but you'll see that later. This is the model with the white putty, and I did a bit of light sanding to take off the excess. And on the back I used a folded piece of sanding paper to get the ridges back a bit, which I had smoothed out with a knife at the beginning. And I thought it worked quite well. Then I covered everything in a grey primer, which wasn't easy in my spray booth because the tail was so long. Yeah, and then I let it dry. Then it was time for my favorite part of the diorama, taking apart the diecast car and adding all the details. And the most striking part, which I really wanted to change, is the black of the seats and the interior of the car. It has to be sandy beige, right? So that will definitely be a job for later. So first I checked all the pieces I had and had a look what could be added maybe. And the first thing I saw were the seats. They didn't have a back cover, so I added a piece of styrene, which I glued to the back. And this was important so I could attach the pockets later, in which you can find the park maps. Then I cut the pieces to shape and sanded down the edges. And for the back of the car I wanted to make it a little suitcase, like the one from which Lex took the flashlight. I glued the suitcase into the back of the car, and then I also took out the plastic pieces from the doors because I wanted to prime them with the rest of the interior. While the primer was drying, I had time for some logos and decals, which I printed on decal paper. And the first one I added was the number plate with the 04 at the end. And back to the interior pieces, which were now ready for the beige sandy base coat. Ta-da! And I had the film on the whole time just to use it as a reference. And it was time to start with the detail painting. In the film, the center console is made of wood, or it looks like wood, so I painted it in a reddish brown and then added the wood grain with a lighter beige brown. The back pockets for the seats I made from paper, which I folded and covered in Art Podge so it would take the paint. And then I added the tiny little park maps to the backs. And then I added some acrylic sheet to the steering wheel, which I think is a very important detail, right? And then I started painting some details on the outside, which were there but not in the right color. Like the logo on the front of the car. So I made that one in the correct colors and added that to the car. Much better. And off camera I also added the water cups to the dashboard and painted the inside of the metal part of the car in the same sandy beige. Then it was time to add the LEDs. And I always use UV resin for this because it cures fast. It's clear and it doesn't corrode the wires of the LED. The mandatory LED check. And then it was time to close the car. I added more details, which I couldn't all show beforehand, but you'll see in the final shots. And then it was time for our T-Rex. I painted her in a khaki beige and let her dry. In the meantime, I could start working on the base, so I just loosely put everything onto the piece of XPS foam so I could mark out the areas for the fence and the ground. And just as a tip, don't use a felt tip pen because it bleeds through multiple layers of texture paint and paint. Just use a pencil maybe. You'll see later. So I taped off the areas where I didn't want any texture paste, like for the trail and the fence. And I used the AK ground texture paste, but you can also just use sand and glue or other materials similar to that, because yeah, those pastes are expensive and I just wanted to use them before they dried up, so you can definitely use different materials for that. And to add more texture to the ground, I'm using shrimp gravel to mimic normal gravel. And even though the texture paste was still wet, I used watered down glue to keep the gravel in place and just spread it a bit more evenly. And while the paste was still wet, I pressed the T-Rex into the ground to make some footsteps, and I secured the T-Rex feet with some liquid masking fluid. Okay, fluid is liquid, but you know what I mean. Then I set the base aside to let it dry, and started working on the fence. I used 2 pieces of styrofoam which I cut to size and glued together and primed them with a mixture of art podge and black paint. And then I spray painted it with different shades of grey to make it look like concrete. Back to the base, I covered everything in a light brown and also some darker areas. And when that was dry, I did some dry brushing to bring out some highlights and let that dry too. And here you can see the pink felt tip pen that bleeds through the texture paste, which has already been airbrushed. So it was quite difficult to get that pink to not shine through. Next I added a brown oil wash to the main ground area. Off camera I added wooden strips to the outside of the base to cover up the foam. And I used greenery from Diorama Presepe, which is pretty much ready to use. I just spray painted them with some lighter greens to give them a more jungle-like color. And the wooden strips were a little bit too light, so they got the oil wash treatment as well. And to balance out the 2 sides of the diorama, I added some more greenery. And for the puddles on the ground, I used AK puddle fluid. It's easy to apply, but mostly you have to use a second layer later because it shrinks quite a bit and the puddles don't look as deep as you want them to. And back to Rexy. After the base coat I noticed that the white putty I had put in didn't really fill the gaps that well, so I used a different putty, an epoxy putty, and fill the gaps again. And I made myself a little stamp so I could add a bit more texture to the putty. Then I covered everything in the same khaki beige and started painting the T-Rex. The underside I started with a light beige, and on the top side I started with a darker brown. I added some stripes and I went back and forth with the different colors until I had the results I was looking for. And with painting the eyes and teeth and tongue and inside of the mouth, the T-Rex was starting to look like a T-Rex. I don't know why I left the fence for last, because it wasn't that hard in the end. I just needed some wire, some styrene, and lots of patience. For the lamps on the fence I used actual LEDs, which I just glued to styrene pieces. I covered the white LED with clear orange paint to make it look like an orange lamp. Close to the finish line now. Time to add the electric trail, which I made from styrene. And I threaded all the wires through a hole in the base and secured the car with a toothpick because I didn't want to rely only on the glue on the wheels. This time I spent a little bit more time on making the underside look a little bit more tidy with the cables and the battery holder. And I didn't glue the fence to the wall, but made it modular so I could maybe take it apart when moving the diorama around or taking it somewhere. We're nearly done now, so let me say thank you very much for watching my video. I was so excited to build this diorama, and I hope you had lots of fun watching it too. So next step is adding the sign I nearly forgot, and then the final results. And before I forget this as well, please subscribe.